This meeting is now being recorded.
Okay, I think we'll get started. We're a minute after the hour. People can still trickle in as we do our intros. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Office of Information Management and Analysis, or OIMA, Brown Bag Series. We'd like to remind you that an OIMA Brown Bag will be held every month. The webinar will be strictly a 30-minute event for both presentations, questions, and answers. The title of today's presentation is Ecological Strategies for Water Remediation and Toxic Algae Control. The speakers will be Jonathan Todd, and also on the line will be Bruce Kanya. Just a little bio about Todd. As president of Todd Ecological Design, John provides robust, large-scale ecological wastewater solutions to the global community, recognizing that affordability, reliability, and aesthetic presentation are essential to large-scale deployments throughout California and beyond. Jonathan is contracted as a consultant by architectural and engineering firms in the design of ecological exhibits, eco-industrial parks, and innovative large-scale water treatment systems. As a personal mission, he has a keen interest in developing sustainable water solutions for refugee populations throughout the world. Bruce Kanya is the CEO of Floating Island International, a Montana company noted for commercializing biomimetic systems to enhance water stewardship. Bruce has been a Montana entrepreneur since the mid-'70s. As head of Floating Island International, Kanya heads up a dedicated team centered around the idea of floating islands as a way to clean water. Today, there are over 4,000 floating islands in both freshwater and marine settings across the planet. With this brief introduction, I will pass the phone line to Jonathan and Bruce to start their presentation.
Good afternoon, folks, and thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to run you through basically what the floating wetland technology is and how it works, and then we'll give you some case studies of these. And we've used them, of course, to do nutrient remediation, wastewater treatment, remediation of mine tailings, and impaired waterways impaired by contaminants such as bunker C or number 6 oil. So we'll sort of touch on each one of those as we go, and we'll explain a little bit about how they work. Floating islands are sort of a man-made analogous technology to peat bogs in nature. They're very powerful in terms of the surface area that they provide, and the plant roots create an opportunity along with the matrix of the BioHaven for attached surfaces, which we'll delve into more. Here in this slide, you can see the root systems, which have basically surface areas that can't be duplicated by man-made medias, combined with the BioHaven matrix, which gives a real foothold to the attached growth community, or the biofilm. And what the floating wetlands can do is reduce nutrient concentrations, whether it's in a natural lake or whether in a wastewater treatment environment or other, decrease algae growth by adding diversity and reducing eutropia. It'll increase your DO levels and decrease your odors. Here is an image of the oldest floating island that was launched in 2004. It's 520 square feet, and it handled nitrogen surges at the end of an irrigation ditch and took the waterway there from very impaired to very vibrant. And as you see from this picture, obviously, are you getting fish habitat and food below the floating island, but above the floating island, you're getting bird habitat. And, I can't tell you all of the different animals I've found in my floating islands and wetlands throughout the years, but you're creating a whole lot of natural habitat and a whole lot of beneficial surface area for the water. Another thing, just to circle back to the first one, is you can use these floating wetlands as native plant nurseries, and you can cull the plants out of them and sort of continue to have a greater effect by spreading the native plant species that do enhance the water into the community. So how it works is a combination of surface area, and the surface area is extremely dynamic. And then depending on the situation that we're faced with, you circulate, or either you're going to use aeration, and you'll see examples of really aggressive forms of circulation in the floating stream bed where you're using large bubbles to baffles and you're really getting the water to circulate around. Or you're just using gentle, fine bubble aeration to move it through. Or pumps, again, are another viable form when you have off-grid opportunities. You can move quite a bit of water with some new efficient pumps that are being produced. And finally, and what we always hope to do in ecological design, is you can circulate it using the natural circulation of the lake wherever possible. So if it has a spring or a fen, or if there's some sort of natural hydrology or gravity situation that will circulate the water, that's always the most preferable means of circulating it. So you can see where the real surface areas and the biofilms, they start in the matrix of the BioHaven, and then they continue out and grow exponentially on the root hairs of the plant. We don't have the image in this particular PowerPoint, but there was one where we did floating islands on a clear-sided cow-wall tank, and in 3 months the entire tank was almost full of plant roots, and it was just really beautiful to see, you know, the combined surface areas really, really powerfully cleaning up the water as it passed through this cow-wall tank. And here you can see why the BioHaven matrix is so effective. There's just so much surface area just in the floating wetland in itself. And then when you combine that with the ecologies that come with the plant roots as they emerge, it gets exponentially more powerful as time goes on, and more effective as well. So this matrix is a huge starting point for the whole ecology that then continues on exponentially with the plant root systems and all the, as now we've sort of started utilizing all 7 kingdoms of life, including mycelia, integrated into both the surface of these floating wetlands and in the root system. So you'll see zooplankton on the surface or in the water column, and mycelia on the surface of these floating wetlands. So obviously, as you get more and more surface area, you get more and more of a food web for the beneficial microbes and habitat for those beneficial microbes. So this surface area where they inhabit gets larger and larger, and the food web that supports them gets larger and larger, and so it gets the impaired waterway back to its pre-stressor conditions, such as golden algae. We know that as salts go up, as nutrient runoff from fertilizer or livestock go in the lake, that it becomes more of a monoculture. And what these surface areas and these biofilms do is they make it a much more crowded buffet, and there's no room for these monocultures to really get a foothold and to take over. So I don't think the claim is that we could ever eliminate golden algae, but what we could think we can do is really control golden algae by creating that pre-stressor ecology in the lake, which just doesn't allow a monoculture to go through because there's too much competition in the whole food web for one algae to take over. The other thing we obviously found is that competitor species, just like cyanobacteria, but also the zooplankton and the grazers, will really hold down the golden algae in this more diverse ecology as opposed to a monoculture of an impaired waterway. Here you can see the close-up of the biofilms. Let me just back to, and it's sort of as the analogy was given to me, it's sort of a 3-dimensional dining room for the fish as well, because without having to bend or twist, they have access to all of this. And it's also a nutrient source for the bacteria that are going to manage all of the nutrients which are impairing the lake and causing the DOs to go down. And so throughout this very biodiverse food web, you have the ability of the lake to repair itself and to not leave that void for the harmful algae blooms. Up to now, we've found that we can treat nitrates, ammonia, all of the things you see listed, and in a recent pilot we did for the EPA in Grafton, Massachusetts, we also found that by integrating the mycelia in the last kingdom of life, that we were able to remove 97% of the petroleum hydrocarbons that passed through our system. So that was a really interesting discovery. So we're now saying that we can pretty much use this floating wetland technology in combination with a lot of biology and circulation to treat most anything. And of course, by virtue of that, they can be deployed in all of these areas. And recently, in wastewater lagoons, we've been upgrading them. So where they've been out of compliance, we've been adding the floating islands and the circulations, and we've been able to take them from far out of compliance to within Title 22 reuse water quality standards. Here you can see some earlier examples. The top is a Chinese canal that we retrofitted with floating island technology. The bottom left was a very strong waste coming from the Tyson chicken plant in Berlin, Maryland. It's coming in at about 450 BODs, and ammonia is up over 60, and we're getting less than 10 coming out of that during operations. Here you'll see in the middle, you see using, again, circulation through airlift and floating islands in the middle, we were able to completely manage the algae in this golf course ponds for the Four Seasons in Hawaii. And the system that we ended up designing for them used 2.5 horsepower, and that was in lieu of the 100 horsepower they were going to use to pump up from a well and then to deep inject it and just use throughput as the only means of controlling algae. And then the final image on this slide is the floating island in Grafton with the mycelia on it, where it was used as part of a series of ecological strategies to break down petroleum hydrocarbons, or number 6 oil, in the sediment and water column. I'm going to show some examples of some successful deployments of floating islands, floating wetland technologies, and ecological design to treat wastewater, stormwater runoff, algae control, etc., through the next few slides. This is an aerial shot of Limonera. This we built in 2014 and got online in 2015. It's 350 homes plus all of the wastewater from a lemon processing plant. It's the Limonera, which is the biggest producer of lemons and avocados in North America, I believe. And this system was designed for up to 225,000 gallons a day of peak flows. But we did it using only their existing lagoons, and so we were able to do it on 20 cents of the dollar of any other technology, and to get them into the very tight compliance regulations that they were forced to meet. And so you can see all of the floating islands sort of closer up in the next slide. And then the final cell of this is a polishing wetland. You can see the polishing wetland on the lower left-hand side, and the rest are all sort of floating islands, or are floating islands with walkways. The water's coming in full strength, typical full strength municipal wastewater, and afterwards we're now consistently meeting the Title 22 standards that we're being held to for our permit. This next sample is the North Valley School in Lodi, California, and this is this is a wastewater pond with odor issues, and this was the most aggressive form of circulation was used for this one, which is the coarse bubbles with the baffles, and which optimizes the circulation in these conditions. And they were able to move the carpet of algae and the odors and remove the BOD, TSS, ammonia 95%. This following example is Yingri Lake in China, and this is a really powerful example of not only just water treatment, but also waterscapes. And so you're creating these extremely aesthetic destination areas that aren't just aesthetic, but they're also treating the water that they're part of the landscape out. And again, you can see some of the really pretty incredible numbers in terms of reductions that you're seeing as incidental to a beautiful waterscape. And this was just outside of Chicago, very close to downtown in Chicago, and I think that the most resonating thing is that since the installation of the floating island here, the sandhill cranes have returned to the floating wetlands and have been nesting there every year. And so that is a powerful statement of, while you're treating the water, you're also creating a habitat and a more vibrant and diverse ecology. And in ecology, it seems to be in biology that diversity is more resonant than monocultures. And so in that area, in the Chicago pond, you saw, higher DOs and better native perennials and diversity, and your water quality is better, your water quality is clear, and obviously there was a BMP award for that. And this is a recent one that I just launched in just outside of Anaheim at East Lake Village in Southern California here. And you can see from this one, because these were navigational channels, we couldn't put our floating islands out where we wanted to have them in the deepest water. So what we're using here as a circulation strategy is super fine bubble aeration that moves a whole lot of water, because the fine bubble with its friction, moves a whole lot of water with it and has a huge zone of impact. And so our idea here is, again, as prevention for additional golden algae blooms. And again, we're going back to that, creating that whole jungle of life underneath and around it and circulating that enough. So we figured that our hope is that we will be able to outcompete the golden algae as the dominant species in the water column. And here again, it's obvious the before and after. One's before the floating islands and one's after the floating islands. And again, the zoo Montana looked like the last slide in the presentation in the before section, and this is how it's looking afterwards. You can see the bottom of the pond, and chemicals can be obviously reduced or eliminated. A lot of the ponds that we come in after are using copper sulfates, including East Lake, which was using copper sulfates to manage algae, and that's kind of bad because it suppresses that whole jungle or web of life that is created, that we're trying to create to make a competitive and natural biology. And that copper sulfate suppresses it, and then you sort of have a monoculture, which is opening that door wide open for an invasive species or an opportunistic species like the golden algae to come in and take over. But when you maintain the biodiversity quality, the hypothesis is that that's going to be much less likely. Again, you can see just exactly how powerful that the addition of the floating wetlands with circulation can be. And finally, this is Fry Lake here in Shepherd, Montana, and this is, you see, with the addition of the floating wetlands, you transition from a very eutrophic ecology to a very diverse, or what they call transitional water ecology, which is extremely conducive to healthy fish populations and fish production. Here they're producing many fish, including fathead minnows. So here using the ecological strategy to convert nuisance nutrients into a value-added product such as a fathead minnow, which then in turn in the environment controls the mosquito populations. So instead of fighting the nutrients, you can use these best management practices or low-impact designs to create transitional waters to take nuisance nutrients and convert them to assets to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. Does anybody have any questions in the room? Go ahead.
Since this is an ecological system, I imagine it would take some time to develop. Could you give us an idea of the time frame that it took to develop and see an improvement, like in Pixie Woods?
Bruce, I'll defer that one to you for Pixie Woods.
I can't speak directly about Pixie Woods in terms of the timing there, but I can say that in other very similar settings, like Holly Pond, for example, that was a 12-month period between the before and after. Typically, when it comes to biofilm development, which launches the whole system, that'll actually be initiated within hours of the surface area being present in the water. However, it will take typically a few weeks to become a mature form of biofilm, and from there periphyton, and from there into the healthy biota that we're targeting. But in general, I would allow for at least one full season to see these kinds of results.
Thank you.
There are a few questions on the chat as well. So one of the questions was, can these only be installed in still water, or is there a max stream flow where you can install them in moving water?
Oh, I think they could easily be installed in moving water. I mean, so long as you're having some contact and some contact time. I mean, rapidly moving water would be less beneficial, but moving water would be a great opportunity, and it would actually enhance its ability to treat as opposed to restrict it.
Okay. And then one other question that came in also is, can you discuss maintenance requirements?
Again, and like just if you want to go back to maybe one of the higher maintenance requirements, which is in wastewater, we're harvesting, I'm going to call it 1.5 times a year, the biomass in Southern California. So we're just cutting back the plants back down to 18 inches and composting that. And a lot of, but I would say in the system like at Grafton, Massachusetts, we just sort of let that naturally evolve, and we let the biomass build up on the floating island, and it supports the ecology within and below it. So it's very low compared to any other sort of wastewater or water treatment approach.
I also got another question. Did anyone else want to ask a question in the room, though? Okay. So this other question that came in the chat also is, do you ever see increased nitrogen from extensive bird nesting on the islands?
That's a good question. Generally, when in the presence, I mean, I'm sure that the increased bird nesting does add to the nitrogen load, but just because you have these, both the luxury uptake of the nitrogen from the plants itself, but also the nitrifiers and the denitrifiers in the biofilm, that you're not going to see an increased nitrates in the water column. Although I'm sure you are bringing some more extra nitrates in, you're more than offsetting it with the biofilm and the luxury uptake of the plants. You agree with that, Bruce?
I could add to that too. The islands, the microbes that occur within the islands themselves are essentially heterotrophic biofilm generators. So they are essentially poised to digest organic bound phosphorus and organic material in general. So it's a good place for birds to be roosting if in fact they're going to be there at the site anyway. We find that frequently when islands go into a waterway, Canada geese, for example, will preferentially roost on floating islands versus on shoreline where they're more exposed to predators. It's a good place for them because we can digest that nutrient and turn it into fish really quickly.
Can you just give an idea of the cost, or like how it compares with other methods?
John, are you going to take that one?
Yeah, let's both take it. I'll just say, okay, in wastewater, which has been my primary experience, I would say that the cost is, for Limonera, we were able to come in at 20 cents on the dollar by being able to just retrofit existing lagoons And basically it's such a powerful bioreactor that you're able to just put just about anywhere that it is, it's a much cheaper alternative. And again, when you're using low impact development strategies to circulate the water through them, you're also using, generally with these systems, I can say about 75% electricity than your conventional alternatives. It really depends on what you're viewing as is it cost effectiveness versus chemical, because these are going to have such a low overhead to operate, but they might be a little bit more expensive, so I don't know what the return on investment would be compared to chemical management. And I guess for lakes and harmful algae blooms, I'm not sure what else we'd consider as viable alternatives.
And I would like to add to that we like to target phosphorus removal as a cost factor in terms of understanding our ultimate impact. And in fact, when it comes to contending with non-point nutrient-loaded waterways, typically associated with ag fertilizer or stormwater inflow, the floating streambed embodiment, a floating treatment wetland in particular, appears to be able to get down to about $30 a pound for phosphorus cycling, as compared to significantly higher costs connected with other technologies that are out there that can begin to contend with non-point nutrient-loaded conditions. Those are particularly challenging, I would say, in terms of the technology options that are available today. The best thing to do, of course, is to prevent the nutrients, but if you can't prevent them, then cycle them into something appropriate, and that's what we do.
I have another question from the chat box. What are the base mats for the islands constructed of, and are there any natural fiber options?
Jonathan, I'll take that. The matrix is essentially recycled drinking water bottles, polyester, inert, and there are organic options. The difference is the BOD connected with the organic options is a factor where we'll see evolution towards more and more of that over time. But the inert nature of the polymer that we work with today has a series of important advantages too. So in any case, the answer is multifaceted.
Another question in the chat box. Would this work on larger ponds, 20 to 30 acres that have very limited outflow? Think Dead Sea.
So you broke up a little towards the end of that?
Would this work on larger ponds, 20 to 30 acres that have very limited outflow? And then he mentioned, think the Dead Sea.
It would work. It's going to depend on what we're targeting, but I think it would be a really good opportunity to work in an area like that. You would want to use off-the-grid strategies like some of those very efficient pumps connected to solar panels as well, but I just think that if you're going to approach some of those 20 or 30-acre water bodies that are pretty seriously impaired like that, I think it's probably your best, if not only bet, is using the sort of floating matrix with some sort of sustainable, in all manners of the world, means of circulating it, especially with a low flow throughput.
I'd like to chime in with a point about the largest BioHaven to date is a 50,000 square foot unit on Lake Rotorua, North Island, New Zealand. And in any case, the concept of lake restoration with floating island technology is real. And what Jonathan said is correct. By integrating solar into our islands, the concept of solar BioHaven systems that run themselves very, very effectively. So we're very enthusiastic and excited about taking on the big lake challenges.
Okay, well, it looks like we're out of time. If there are any more questions, you can direct your questions towards Jonathan or Bruce. Their email addresses are on the screen. And thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for coming.
Thank you all. Thanks, guys. Thanks for hosting us.